I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their evening for joining us. My name is Jeffrey Pickett. I'm the Community Outreach Strategist for the Lowell Public Schools, and you'll be hearing from Superintendent Boyd and members of our leadership team this evening as we take you through the planning steps for returning more students to in-person learning come April. Before we get into tonight's presentation, though, I want to turn things over to my colleague, Vinak Kin, who will take you through how to access our interpretation rooms here in this Zoom forum. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Vinak.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm Vinak, the Bilingual Family Liaison for the district. This evening we had, and through requests, Vietnamese, Arabic, French, and Portuguese interpretation. If you would like to listen to one of those languages instead of English, please click the interpretation icon on your Zoom. The icon will look like a globe, and then select your language.
Great, well, thank you, Vinak. We just want to let everybody know that we are recording this evening, and this is also being broadcast live on Facebook. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Joel Boyd.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, community members, families, parents, staff who are joining us here this afternoon. Jeffrey, can you show the presentation and get that loaded? So, families, it's great to be able to engage you today where we're talking about more students coming back to in-person learning. But before I do that, I want to thank all of you for the extraordinary amount of partnership throughout this year. I want to thank all of our staff for the extraordinary work throughout this year. I really do believe that our students here in Lowell will be better off from having experienced this crisis here in Lowell than they would have been anywhere else because of the extraordinary partnership between home and school, the extraordinary hard work that all of you as families have undertaken this year, and the amount of hard work of our staff this year. The year's not over, and we're going to continue forward this year with the option of remote learning if that's what you're choosing as a family. However, we're also going to be working to bring back more and more students to in-person learning as the calendar continues to extend. So you may have heard that the governor and the commissioner of education recently put forward new requirements around structured learning time. So there's different requirements around whether we can actually, as school districts in Massachusetts, continue to offer hybrid or remote learning as requirements. We can offer it as optional, but we're going to start moving forward with full-time in person, as you've heard from the commissioner in the many press conferences. And we wanted to share with you today what that'll look like from a district level. However, as families, I know you're looking for the specifics from the school-based sessions, and you will be getting information from your principals about school-based sessions to talk about the specifics of what this will look like at each individual school site. You should have also heard from your teachers and individuals at your schools with determining whether you're going to choose to come in person when your grade level returns to in person, or whether you're going to choose to stay remote. Please make sure you're continuing to engage in those conversations as well. Next slide, Jeffrey. So today we're going to take you through just the guiding principles around that we've been utilizing throughout this year as we plan, the updated guidance from the commissioner, a summary of what our in-person expansion plan looks like, and we'll go into the operations and staffing, professional development, as well as the opportunities to continue to engage you as families, as well as the next steps. Next slide. So all right, so you may recall, those of you that participated in our sessions from the summer as we were going into the fall, we established these guiding principles, that our decisions will be guided by the latest health data and input from public health experts, and we'll continue to monitor the rate of positive cases here in Lowell and statewide. You'll hear from Dr. Hall the updates and the guidance from the public health experts and what the current positive cases here in Lowell enable us to do in terms of expanded in-person learning. 2, we're going to maximize options for families and offer in-person learning as well as a remote option. You heard me mention before, we're going to hold to that. And 3, making a commitment to equity with the belief that a public education is a fundamental civil right. So families and students who have historically been underserved will continue to have a voice in the planning process and have their needs met. You may, many of you may be participating in our first wave of full-time in-person learners, where we started in September and we were able to bring back the in-person learners who are part of our lottery system for our most vulnerable learners that we brought back at the beginning of March. So our students that were in that wave will have had almost 2 months of full-time in-person learning by the time that we expand in April. Next slide, including both October and March, of course. All right, so this is the commissioner's latest guidance. This was released last week, and it changes how we can look at what's called structured learning time. Basically, what is allowed to count as school days. So the first point here comes right from that guidance, and that's that these aren't just guidance, they're legal regulations. And any district that doesn't comply with the regulatory requirements will be required to make up missed structured learning time unless a waiver was already approved. And then because the regulations have the force of law, that doesn't require the school committee to vote on which model. If you recall back from the summer, we were talking about 3 models of remote, hybrid, or full-time in person. That doesn't require now the school committee to vote because the law is full-time in person with an option for remote for families. Next slide. Trying to adjust pace so that our interpreters can pick up. So apologize to those of you that are following our English channel and might be sensing that we're going a little bit slowly. That's so that our interpreters can pick up and follow along within our interpretation channels. Next slide. Oh, here you go.
Yes.
All right, thank you. There's all right, so the commissioner's guidance was this, that there would be 3 phases: elementary phase, middle school phase, and a high school phase. The elementary phase is K through 5. Now, our 5th graders are part of our middle school, but we're going to still hold to the K to 5 to align our scheduling, as you'll see, but also to provide the added benefit for students that are in that entering grade in middle school. We'll have the opportunity to come back and start in person while there's still a very small population of in person, given it's their first time on a middle school campus. So that date is April 5th for grades K through 5. There's the middle school phase, grades 6 through 8. The commissioner said April 28th, but we're going to be utilizing the date of April 26th. And that's because it's immediately following our April vacation. Now, the high school phase, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, the commissioner said they're going to announce details on what's required for high school. So we're awaiting that guidance, but we're going to continue to plan because our high school is unique. We're the 2nd largest high school in the Commonwealth, and we do want to plan towards some level of in-person learning, but there's a lot more limitations around our high school than maybe some of the other smaller high schools in the Commonwealth. So we're going to continue with planning, but know that we're still waiting on details from the commissioner on what high schools will look like across the Commonwealth. And we're also going to be planning towards that April 26th date for our high school as well, because again, it's immediately following the April vacation. Next slide. All right, so this here in visual form summarizes those dates. We are positioned fairly well for this expansion of in-person learning because we had always been planning for an April expansion of in-person learning. On February 22nd, our substantially separate special education students returned to full-time in-person. On March 1, we were able to return those students who started this school year in person to full-time in person. And we were planning for an April expansion. The commissioner's guidance, however, changes how we go about that, but we've already planning for that time frame. So April 5th will be 5 days per week in-person instructional model for elementary school students who are choosing to be in person. There will continue to be a parental option of full remote. On April 5th, we'll also be welcoming back grade 5 students in our middle schools who are choosing to return to in-person learning for 5 days a week, again, while maintaining a parental option for full remote. After the April vacation, April 26, we'll be returning grades 6 through 8, again, 5 days per week with a parental option. Now, here's where it gets a little bit unique for Lowell compared to what you might be hearing around the rest of the state. We're going to be continuing to plan for our high school. We're going to be planning around a hybrid model, again, because there's 3,200 students at on our high school campus. And with 3,200 young adults on one campus at one time, we're not seeing that the science right now, and you'll hear Dr. Hall share with you some of the updated research studies around social distancing and so on, but we're not seeing right now how it would be feasible to have full time on campus with the size of our high school. So we're going to continue to plan down a hybrid model for April 26th. However, it's important, those of you that are high school students that are listening or family members of high school students, we do still have to abide by what is state law. And this commissioner has said that the guidance will be forthcoming around high school. So stay tuned, we'll give you out more information. But until then, we are planning for a hybrid model at the Lowell High School for April 26th. That's the only grade levels that we'll be looking at the hybrid model for. Everybody else will be looking at full-time in person. Next slide. All right, so the in-person expansion plan. You're gonna have several dates in front of you. Not only the first day that we come back, you'll be making a decision there when your schools call you no later than the end of this week for our April 5th return or April 26th. Those of you that are choosing to be remote, you'll have an opportunity to change that decision May 3rd. For those of you that are choosing in person for April 26th, if you're choosing remote, you can change that decision again on May 24th. The reason for that is we can't, it's really difficult to manage in-person and remote environments if we have students moving back and forth daily between those environments. So in order to provide a quality experience for your children, whether they be remote or in person, we need to establish some stability. So we believe the reasonable approach there is 1 month increments. So we're asking you to make a decision, and we're going to be asking you to hold to that decision for 1 month at least. And then at the beginning of the next month or the end of the next month, depending on what grade level you're in, you'll have an opportunity to then change that decision. So you're not locked in for the whole year, but we do ask you to remain consistent at least for a month. So that way we can provide a quality experience for your children, whether they be remote or in person, without the shifting back and forth that would be a bit unmanageable. Next slide. All right, so what were we talking about when we say a high school is a bit unique? So in addition to the fact that we have the second largest high school in the Commonwealth, next to Brockton, 3,200 students on our high school campus, there's a number of scheduling requirements across the high school. Every one of our students basically is in a unique schedule moving towards their graduation requirements. So there's a significant number of variables that have to be carefully weighed within the context of COVID-19. So right now, that's why we're planning towards hybrid, to make sure that we can hold our rosters consistent, stay to all of what the current research tells us about safety guidelines, keep the entire community safe within an environment that is the second largest high school in the Commonwealth. So a little bit different for the high school versus what you've been hearing, but again, we'll make sure we adapt as we hear additional information come out from the commissioner and as the COVID-19 environment continues to evolve. Next slide. All right, so Dr. Hall, our Chief Operating Officer, is going to share with you the most up-to-date information as it relates to the operations of our schools. And then Ms. Desmond will share with you how those operational features will be met while making sure that we can provide to your children the highest quality instructional environment possible. Ms. Desmond's our Chief Academic Officer. Before Ms. Desmond, Dr. Hall, if you can take families through the operations of our schools within COVID-19.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Boyd. And thanks for joining us, everyone. As you can see from this slide, DESE's taken the position that it's always supported that 3 feet in social classrooms or 3 feet in classrooms is safe for physical distancing. And there's also been additional studies since September by the Massachusetts chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics and from Mass General Brigham, stating that there aren't significant differences between 1, 3, and 6 feet when both parties are masked. And I say both parties are masked because that's important later, because in the cafeterias or when you're eating lunch, obviously both people aren't going to be masked in that situation. So we may have different spacing for children when they're eating. Next slide, please. One of the really good things that's happening right now is the state's paying for pool testing. So we have a large number of staff members and students who are volunteering for this. However, you have to consent to it. So it's available on our website or through your principal. But if you consent, then your student can be involved in pool testing. And what it involves is anywhere between 5 and 8 students all take the test with a Q-tip, and it's put in a vial. And if any one of those 5 to 8 samples comes up positive, everyone in that pool is then given a confirmatory test to see who truly is positive out of the pool. And there's been some great results. These numbers are about a week to 10 days old, but it showed a very low number of students who were in school tested positive in the 2 weeks ago when this was run. Next slide, please. So we've been working on facilities in order to make them safer for in-person learning. The city reported that 87% of its exhaust, ventilation, and fresh air intakes were now working. I think that's up double to what was going on in August or September. So the city's made some vast improvements in getting these systems running and getting fresh air being exchanged within the schools. Additionally, we have an air purifier in every classroom, and we recently asked for and were donated 50 additional purifiers from DESE, and we ordered an additional 100 backup air purifiers. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be changing the filters in the purifiers because after 6 months, they're scheduled for a change of filter. And additionally, we're going to be using interior classrooms in order to keep the class sizes as small as possible and students spaced out. Starting on April 5th, we'll be using interior classrooms if they have an air purifier. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, there are challenges with eating in school because people aren't going to be wearing masks while they're eating. So what DESE has suggested is that principals look at eating outside the classroom in small groups, eating outside, or having classroom seating in some instances where the children can be spaced out. With Lowell High, they would be dismissed prior to lunch, so that's less of a concern at the high school. And additionally, the school committees authorized some new cafeteria positions to help deliver hot meals and also to do high touch point cleaning when meal service isn't being worked on. Additionally, you'll see in the next slide that we're reopening elementary school cafeterias, and we're doing that 2 per week in order to process all the people back through HR. Next slide, please. Here's the schedule that you can see for the elementary schools and the K through 8s that are going to be reopening their cafeterias over the next 2 weeks. Next slide, please. So transportation, we've been studying this. One of the challenges that's out there now is there aren't enough drivers who are available to expand busing. So presently, the recommendation is to keep the current policy, which is in place just for this year, which is to transport grades 1 through 6 who live more than 2 miles away. Since we may have about double the number of students coming in, we're going to need those buses in order to accommodate that number of students who are coming back on April 5th versus what is presently available. But over the next few weeks, we'll continue to work on this and see if later in May we can expand this. But presently, there aren't enough drivers in the supply pool to run more buses with certainty. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges HR is facing is there are some teachers that may elect to take a leave of absence or have a high risk that they're allowed to teach remotely. So in some instances, you may have another adult who's streaming in their teaching to the classroom, or the teacher may have a leave of absence for the rest of the year, and you may have a new teacher entirely with your student. Next slide, please. Vaccines. We had a great event, 2-day event, where 350 Lowell school personnel on February 25th got vaccinated. They're going to have their second vaccination on March 25th. Additionally, this week, it appears we'll have a total of another 200 vaccines for Lowell residents who are educators. And then additionally, the Commonwealth has now launched a pre-registration site for everyone. And on March 27th, April 3rd, April 10th, and April 11th, those dates will be reserved for educational personnel to get vaccines. Next slide, please. Yep, so with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Desmond.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. So I did notice that in the chat, as things are going along, that some parents had some questions about, will the remote learning count for student learning time? We are providing professional development for our staff so that our staff learns to use the technology that will allow for the classroom experience to be televised via Zoom to students at home. So if a family chooses remote learning, they would still be participating in the daily class instruction, just in a remote format. And so that would count towards the student learning time. What we will be training staff to do is be able to teach in a concurrent model. So using cameras and technology, what they're instructing students in the classroom is what students will experience remotely as well. Our professional development will be open to all staff starting the week of March 20th. Well, March 20th is a Saturday, and then the week of March 22nd after school. So we will be offering at least 6 hours of professional development, and that professional development will provide staff with the models for a concurrent instruction, models for concurrent instruction, so that what's happening in the classroom is also provided to the students in the remote environment. Next slide, Jeffrey. And with that, I will turn it over to Chief Phillips to talk a little bit about the family information sessions that are upcoming.
Sure, thank you. So we know how critical information is right now, which is why we are holding these 2 initial sessions today. And then tomorrow we have another session in English, and then an evening session that will be held in Spanish. And then as a follow-up, our bilingual family liaisons will be holding small group multilingual sessions in the language in Khmer, Portuguese, Spanish, and Swahili. So if you want to have more discussion around what we've presented today, we will have a schedule for the bilingual family liaison small group sessions. And then each school is being asked to schedule school-based orientations between March 17th and March 26th, so that you can have information specific to your child's school. We do want to affirm our commitment to serving our multilingual community. So please do know that all of our schools are equipped with access to our language line. So please don't hesitate to reach out to your school with questions And if you need interpretation in a language other than English, we will do our best to make sure that you receive the information that you need in the language that your family has requested communication in.
So the challenges and opportunities that we are aware of currently is obviously bringing students back to the in-person instruction allows us to provide a full range of strategies and techniques to support children in all of the tiered models. It also allows for us to do in-person data collection and be able to develop the social emotional learning needs that may not have been addressed in a remote environment. Some of the challenges that we're certainly preparing for to be able to come up with solutions ahead of time are scheduling students to minimize the need to travel between classes, maintaining all of the mitigation strategies that Chief Hall spoke about earlier. Classroom rosters, to the best of our ability, we want to maintain the rosters the way they are. So students that are remote and students that are coming in person still are engaging with the same staff that they've been engaging with right along where possible. And then, determining how to safely provide breakfast and lunch in school and implement effective strategies to provide limited interruption in any of the instructional models that are going on in person and remote. Next slide, Jeffrey. Some of the other things that we're looking at, as Chief Hall mentioned, transportation, air purifiers, and then the social distancing requirements for mealtime when students may not be able to wear their masks. And as Chief Phillips mentioned, some of the things that we're looking at is how are we effectively communicating to families around health protocols, two-way communication between school and families, providing family choice for the instructional models that we're offering based on what the commissioner has instructed us to do, and then also developing new routines and having family engagement be a part of that. Next slide, Jeffrey.
So good afternoon, families. This graphic is intended to share with you the many phases that we have been experiencing this year. Phase one is, we can say it's essentially closed at this point. This was the beginning of the year through February 22nd. And then we entered into phase two around our expanded reopening. So when we got back to returning our students back in person through our shift to the April 5th time slot. And so this is what the bulk of this presentation has shared with you. And then phase three will certainly look at the expansion for our secondary schools, looking at the middle school and then middle schools, and then what will need to happen in the high school setting. So again, the idea here is to share with you the many tasks that you all have been experiencing, certainly as families and certainly as staff. But we want to make sure that we delineate each of these phases for you. So we're entering into phase two, which will begin on April 5th. And the next slide, we will share with you some of the next steps that we will continue pressing through in order to be ready, fully ready for our students and families April 5th. So the next steps that we are looking at will be certainly these forums that we are engaged in right now with community. March 17th through 26th, school communities will be hosting a similar type of session with each of its respective communities to again review this level of information, but then talk about the school specific aspects of the reopening plan. March 20th through 25th will be the professional development for teachers that Chief Desmond shared with you. And then certainly up through March 29th, our schools are continuing to finalize their plans. I think many of the parents that are sharing their thoughts in the chat are saying, I initially selected an in-person seat, Now I'm looking at rethinking that. So all of these adjustments are your thinking around that certainly impacts what happens in the classrooms and at the school level. So schools will continue engaging in that. Dr. Board shared with you the dates for making certain choices after the April 5th timeline. So April 5th certainly is our first day of expanded in-person seats for grades K through 5. April 26th is the first day for expanded in-person learning for grades 6 through 8. And then April 26th is also the date for the LHS hybrid model to begin there. Next slide. I think that may be it.
That is it.
That is, Jeffrey, if you can help to facilitate some questions that families. So that concludes the presentation, but we're gonna engage some of the questions here. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. Can't guarantee that we'll be able to get to all of the questions, but we'll certainly do our best. The presentation, for those of you that were thinking about doing tomorrow's session, it's gonna be the same presentation, but certainly if you wanna participate, please feel free. And let's see if we can go through some of the questions, as many of them as we can while we have time within the hour, Jeffrey.
So to pick up on what Dr. Guillory had just addressed, this particular question is about somebody who picked a cohort model for their younger child to go in 2 days a week when we initially surveyed families. And of course, based on state guidance, that is no longer an option for grades K to 8. So what would you advise that parent in terms of making a choice about in-person or remote and how to reach out to their school?
Yeah, so thank you, Jeffrey. So there isn't going to be a 2-day a week model. That's not allowed by the state anymore to count as structured learning time. So if you want in-person, I would choose in-person. If for some reason it's not working well, you can move back to remote, but keep in mind, you won't be able to adjust for in-person except for on those month-by-month intervals that we talked about at the beginning. So if you're choosing in-person now, you'll be in person on April 5th. If you don't choose in person now, your next opportunity won't be till May to choose in person. So you'll want to keep that in mind. If you are considering in person for 2 days, you may want to consider in person for 5 days as well. And that might be, but there's not going to be an option to create kind of an individual schedule. That's what I was sharing at the beginning. That just won't be a way that we can really support everybody instructionally. You'll choose either in person or remote, and each month you'll have a chance to adjust that decision.
Another question we got was about transportation, specifically about guidelines for which students would be eligible for transportation.
Yeah, so if you're grades 1 through 6 and you live more than 2 miles from your school, you'll be eligible for transportation. That's the extent of who's eligible for transportation. If you're not sure whether you're more than 2 miles from school, don't hesitate, call our transportation office. Jeffrey, if you can put that number in, they can do the calculation for you and let you know if you're more than 2 miles from school.
Sure. Give me 1 sec. I'll put that in the chat. In the meantime, we have a question about if you choose remote for your student, will the student be able to keep his or her current teacher?
That's the goal. So we're working towards that as the goal. We're going to try to keep the teacher-student relationships as consistent as possible. However, there may be unique circumstances in individual classrooms or at individual schools. So you're going to want to make sure you participate in your individual session with your school. Also make sure you stay in contact with your principals. As a common rule, our goal is to try to keep our teacher-student relationships as consistent as possible. If there's an exception to that, if something is unique due to your child's classroom or your child's school, your principal will be connecting with you and we'll be able to share that with you as part of the school-based information sessions and certainly as part of the conversations you have with them.
We have a question about why now, so late in the school year. Maybe we can talk about the state requiring all school districts to do this. This is really not a choice for individual cities and towns.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is statewide. It's statewide. All school districts will be moving in this direction. And the reason for that is beyond just it being state law, we do believe that face-to-face instruction, nothing takes the place of that. And for many families, having access to face-to-face instruction is essential and is necessary. Many families are doing very well with remote, so we do think that that option will be important. And why now is so that we can continue to progress towards more and more students coming in person, so that hopefully first day of school next year, we can start with all students back in person. That's the hope, depending on how COVID-19, the vaccine, and so on rolls out during the course of the summer. So you can see this as kind of a progression throughout the course of this year, going to more and more students in person, ultimately to next year. We're going to also have expanded summer school offerings. And for many students, face-to-face instruction is really the best way that they're able to engage in learning. So even one day in person can really be really valuable for some students. For those of you families that if you've hit a routine and you're finding it to be really successful to be remote, that'll be an option that'll continue to be there for you, but it's a family option, not a requirement based on state law.
We had a question about wanting to go over the dates again for when we return to in-person, specifically the middle school date, because our date differs slightly with that of the states. We're a little bit earlier.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's the great slide to have up there. So you're right, it does differ slightly. The reason is that the state is using an April 28th date. Well, our students return back from spring break. That Monday, April 26th, is the natural next day. It's the day they return back, and it's a Monday. So with our students naturally returning back from spring break, it makes sense here, we believe, to use April 26th as opposed to Wednesday. You're already going to be adjusting routines as a family. To have to adjust those routines 2 times over in the same week, we didn't think that made a lot of sense for you as families. So you'll continue to have the option for full remote. And those of you that are choosing to come in person, you can do that immediately following the April vacation.
And while we went over dates, let's look at the dates for when you can request. If families may select in person from remote learning, let's just go over those dates again one more time.
Yeah, sure. So you're going to make a decision for April 5th by the end of this week with your schools. Some of you maybe already made that decision. Some of you are possibly changing your mind. By the end of this week, we're going to ask those to be locked in. That's going to determine where your placement is for April 5th. If after that you then change your mind again, the next time will be May 3rd for K through 5. For our 6 through 12, your first time you'll be making a choice for the April 26th. That'll be locked in for you. Your next decision point will be on May 24th. We're looking to make sure we can support families with changes within the family circumstances often as possible. So those that start on April 5th, you'll have 2 points, April 5th, May 3rd, and then May 24th. Those of you that are starting on April 26th, obviously that's rather late in the year already, so you'll be able to change your mind for May 24th. But we're going to look for some consistency here in order to be able to support your children and those children staying remote with quality instruction. So we can't have students moving back and forth daily, but we think this is as much shifts as we can do while still committing to high quality instruction for you. And hopefully this works for you as families as your circumstances evolve as well.
While we have the slide deck up again, we have a request to show slide number 15. So I'm just going to pull that up. So I don't know if Dr. Hall, if you want to just go over this briefly again.
Sure. So there are some teachers who are in the highest tier of risk who may elect to teach remotely. Some may opt to still come in, but the impact is there may be paraprofessionals or teachers who are in charge of streaming the instruction in from the teacher that will be in front of the children, managing the classroom while the teacher streams in the instruction. The second group is if there is no medical exception and the staff member still feels as though they don't want to come in, they're afforded the opportunity to take a leave of absence. The impact on that for students, would there be potentially a new adult who is the teacher for the students until the end of the year? And the reason for this is there's just not an infinite supply of qualified people to come in and manage the classrooms, or we wouldn't be able to balance all the equities to have people at home and people in the class at the same time. So there could be some of these situations where your student is impacted.
Great, thank you. Where can families let the schools know if they want to go full in person, if they haven't already done so?
Yeah, Dr. Guillory, can you take them through the process that schools are following to confirm with families? You should be hearing from your schools. So Dr. Guillory is our chief schools officer. He supervises all of our schools, works directly with the principals. So Dr. Guillory, can you take them through what that would look like for them as families, what they should expect?
Sure. So schools are taking different channels to attack this problem, all to attend to arrive at the same goal. So some schools have sent out an additional survey to parents asking for them to respond to that. Some schools have done dojo messages. Some classroom teachers are giving this feedback. Some schools have also done personalized calls to every family. So if you have made a decision and want to communicate that back, your best bet is either to work directly with your child's teacher to share that decision or that determination, or certainly give the school a call and speak with either the main office clerk or request to speak to the principal or assistant principal. But your goal is to inform the school community what your decision is if you've not had contact, or even if you're thinking of changing your mind and making some adjustment to what you've already communicated.
Thank you. Heading over to our Facebook page, there's some discussion about the 3 feet versus the 6 feet. So if we could just reiterate, I thought Dr. Hall very succinctly mentioned or explained that with the masks and the importance of wearing that. So if you could just reiterate that point.
Sure. And Jeffrey, can you put up that visual again so people can see the latest research?
Sure.
So the research actually came out of Massachusetts. Dr. Hall will share. Interestingly enough, Dr. Fauci was on CNN this weekend referencing the Massachusetts research on social distancing and how he's currently evaluating the same body of literature. Dr. Hall, can you share what the latest research is?
Sure. So there are two pieces of research. The Brookline School Department did one several months ago, and then recently DESE sent one out. But the gist of the research is that when two parties are wearing masks, there's very little or no difference in transmission between those distances when both people are wearing a mask. It certainly changes when one party's wearing a mask or no one's wearing a mask, but the point of it all is to show that in a controlled environment, such as a classroom, when children are seated and spaced and instructed or ordered to wear masks, the research shows that there's little difference between 1 foot, 3 feet, and 6 feet when both are wearing a mask. And again, that's different when children are eating because they don't have their masks on. In those situations, you would need to space out 6 feet. So this is basically what DESE has been stressing to the districts lately, and they've basically reinforced that 3 feet should be used, and that's coming directly from DESE.
Thank you. Looking at other questions here, of course, you could ask questions with our Q&A feature, and you could also ask questions in the chat as well.
Jeffrey, I just saw one pop up that might be of interest to others just around pool testing. I've participated in the pool testing. It is It's not uncomfortable, nor is it difficult to do. Dr. Hall, can you share a little bit about pool testing? So those of you that have students coming back into school, you'll have an opportunity to consent to it. It is consensual, so you'll have to consent to it for your child. And Dr. Hall, can you share about pool testing? I participate in the pool testing that we do here personally, and I can share with you that there was no discomfort whatsoever from my own experience with it. But Dr. Hall, can you share overall?
Sure. This test is designed to be a lot less painful, I think, than the ones that you may be used to. Like, I've been tested a few times in Lawrence, and they try to, I think, get up as far as possible in your nostril. This one is more of a gentle swab in the interior of your sidewall of your nostril, which second graders are supposed to be able to do themselves, and then place it in the collection tube. So it's not painful like the one that you probably experienced at the doctors or in Lawrence or locally, or even at Showcase Cinema had them. This one is more gentle swabbing of your side of your nostril, not up in your nostril like the test that the adults are probably used to. But again, we do need consent to this. Parents can contact their principal, either fill out a form, email in, or I've heard even some principals are accepting chat dialogue with parents to consent to it. So please consider this for the student. It'll make it safer for everyone.
We have a question about professional development. So if Ms. Desmond could go over the schedule for when teachers will be undergoing their professional development.
Sure, thank you, Jeffrey. So professional development will be Saturday morning, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday after school hours, the week of the 22nd. So I did see in the chat a few families were concerned that there wouldn't be school those days. School will be in session those days. This will be outside of school hours.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, if I can pause, I just want to extend an invitation to our families who are participating in the interpretation rooms to please not hesitate to place any questions they might have, and our interpreters can support us with your question if you have them.
Thank you. If this is back to pool testing, if someone tests positive in the pool, what happens after that?
I don't know if you can show the slide, but basically those that are in the pool that test positive are then given a confirmatory test to determine within 15 minutes who the person was that was positive in the pool. And then we would assess who was positive and who their close contacts were, and then do quarantining analysis after determining who the positive was.
Thank you. Looking through for additional questions. We have a question about if classrooms will be fogged during the school day. So the fogger that disinfects our buildings and common spaces.
So Dr. Hall, can you share a little bit about what we do in terms of cleaning our buildings, how we utilize those foggers? All of the protocols that we have had in place will remain in place with the adjustments that we shared with you here. So Dr. Hall, can you share a bit about the cleaning and how the foggers work?
Sure. So the foggers are used at the end of the school day, and occasionally they'll be used during the school day, but a lot of staff has suggested that it's not helpful to fog during the middle of the day, but we have the ability, if the students are out of the classroom for 15 minutes, to fog in there if we have agreement with the adults in the room. But after school, fogging is used on all the classrooms to disinfect them on a nightly basis.
Thank you. So we have a question about ninth graders having the opportunity to go into the high school alone at first, since they haven't had that experience of acclimating to the building.
Yeah, so we have a ninth grade academy. So those of you that are family members of ninth graders, we actually have separate building that's our ninth grade academy that works with our high school. We don't anticipate our high school students coming back at different phases. And we think the ninth grade academy offers that opportunity for our ninth graders to have a little bit of a different experience. But primarily, it's not as much of a possibility as with our fifth graders, because we're starting high school so much later in the year. We're already after spring break. So we feel it's necessary there to make sure we maximize the time. I think I'm guessing, Jeffrey, that those families are looking at the fact that fifth graders got to start up earlier. Should we also look at ninth graders? Right now, it's not part of our plan, but I appreciate the thought and the feedback there. And for those families that are new to the high school experience here in Lowell, there is a ninth grade academy, and our high school will be sharing information about that as you get into the school-based information session for high school.
Thank you. How will specials be conducted in elementary school? That's a question that just came in.
Sure. There's going to be some school by school differences, but Ms. Desmond or Dr. Guillory, do you want to kind of share the broad overview? And then there will be some school by school differences there.
Sure. So I think the model is very similar to the in-class experience with other subject matters. The art and music teacher most likely would be going into a classroom and providing concurrent instruction, just like a mainstream teacher would be. Dr. Guillory, did you want to add to that?
No, I think just to expand to it, it's all specials will continue, our allied arts will continue to be honored. I think the point that Chief Desmond is making is that space is sort of the limiting reagent, and what we have to, school leaders and school teams are figuring out creative ways to ensure that students continue to get the full complement of their educational experience. So there will be some tweaks or some things that look different than they have in the past, but the goal is to continue to remain committed to the full experience as best as possible for all teachers and students in that sense.
We look like we're hitting nearing 6 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of all families, and I also want to make sure that our interpretation rooms can have time to summarize the close. But I would say families, number one, it's been a very, very long school year, and we really appreciate all of your support and flexibility and patience to get us to a place of where we're talking about this expansion of in-person learning. So in some ways it's exciting, but we also know it also is anxiety inducing. You will be hearing from your schools. You'll also have your school-based information session to share out with you the specifics about your schools. Our goal here is to try to keep as much consistency and continuity as possible while making sure that we welcome back as many students to in-person learning as soon as we can based on the new state guidance. A big difference for you as families, whereas in the fall you entered a lottery and based on the outcome of that lottery determined whether you got a seat. Here, if you're choosing to come back to in-person, you'll be afforded a seat full-time in person by simply making that choice. You're going to do that for April 5th, K through 5, April 26th for 6 through 12. 9 through 12 will be, right now, we're looking at the hybrid, but we're still awaiting additional state guidance. If you make that decision now, you're locked in for a month. We ask you to lock yourself in for a month, just so that we can provide the type of quality experience for your children and other children without the movement in and out. But you will have an opportunity each month to make an adjustment to your decision, because we know these are big decisions and we understand the severity of COVID-19. We're going to make sure that we do this safely. We're going to make sure that we do it as well as we possibly can for our children and for you as families, but it will continue to require the level of partnership that you've been participating in with remote learning, because this is going to be new for our teachers as well, teaching in a simultaneous and concurrent environment. And it's going to require that home and school partnership. It's not going to be perfect, but I do believe that our teachers here in Lowell are the best teachers in the Commonwealth. And I do believe that our children here in Lowell, your children, our children, will be better off from having experienced this crisis here in Lowell than if they had experienced it anywhere else. Unfortunately, we're all in this circumstance together of experiencing this unprecedented crisis at all. So I just really thank you for all of your support, your partnership, your flexibility. I know we didn't get to all of the questions. If you feel free to join us tomorrow for the session, we'll continue to communicate out as frequently as we can, and we'll continue to give you as much information as possible. Stay in touch with your schools, however. They'll have the most specific information as to how it relates to each school environment. With that said, Jeffrey, thank you for facilitating us. Team, thank you for sharing out with families. Teachers, big thank you to you if you're on this call, and parents, really appreciate you. And I think I saw some high school students. So students, thank you for staying engaged within your learning process. Thank you.